Figure 1. The triad of Elephantine, Khnom, Satet, and Anukit. The difficulty of maintaining separate cults, combined with other reasons, led the priests at a very early time to group several together in one temple as a divine family, usually in a triad of father, mother, and son. In rarer instances, a god might have two wives, as at Elephantine, and sometimes at Thebes. In the case of a goddess who was too prominent to be satisfied with the second place as the wife of a god, she was associated with a lesser male divinity as her son, as at Dendera. Figure 2. Some gods of prehistoric Egypt whose worship later was lost. A. B. A bearded deity much used as an amulet. C. D. A double bull, Khonsu. E. An unknown bull god, a dwarf divinity, similar to Sokari, but found far in the south. In other words, the peculiar value of the ancient Egyptian religion is that it forms the clearest case of transition from the views of the most primitive tribes of mankind to those of the next higher religious development, as represented especially in the religion of Babylonia. Figure 3. The sun god watching the appearance of his disk in the eastern gate of heaven. It is even doubtful whether the worship of the sun god was originally important, while the scanty attention paid to the moon in historical times and the confusion of three planets under one name again make it certain that no cult of them had been transmitted from the days of the ancestors. Fig. 4 Pictures of Capri form in human form. The first of all cosmic powers to find general worship was the sun, whose rays dominate Egypt so strongly. The earliest efforts to personify it identified it with an old hawk god, and thus sought to describe it as a hawk which flew daily across the sky. Therefore, the two most popular forms of solar deity, Re and Horus, have the form of a hawk or of a hawk-headed man. Later sometimes also of a lion with a hawk's head. Figure 5 Capri as the infant sun. Less popular is the description of the sun as Capri. Kepler in the earlier orthography, or the scarab-like, that is as a scarab rolling his egg, the sun, across the sky. Or as a man who wears a scarab on his head or instead of a head. Figure 6. Capri with the sun-eye double appearance. Later theologians endeavored to harmonize this idea with the other representations of the sun god by explaining Capri as the weaker sun, that is as it appears in the morning when the solar egg is formed, or, sometimes, in the evening, or even as the sun in embryonic condition beneath the horizon at night, when it traverses the regions of the dead and shines on the lower world. When the scarab draws a second egg behind it or carries two eggs it flies athwart the sky, it symbolizes the morning and the evening sun. Figure 7. The sun god rows a departed soul over the sky. The deity may either be the only occupant of the boat, which moves by itself or is paddled by him, or he may be accompanied by many prominent gods, especially the 9 gods of the Heliopolitan Ennead and the personifications of wisdom, etc. In the latter case the great ship, which one text registered describes as 770 cubits in length, is rowed by numerous gods and souls of kings and other, originally especially prominent, dead, the followers of Horus, or of Rev, i.e., of the god to whom the ship of the sun belonged. Figure 8. A star as rower of the sun in the daytime. The Book of the Gates reverts to an ancient idea by explaining that the never-vanishing stars, that is again the elect souls, become the rowers of the sun by day. Then the sun may rest in the cabin as a disk in which the god himself may be enthroned, or as the Uranus asp, the symbol of fire. In the latter form, he may also twine around the prow, cabin, or any other part of the vessel. Figure 9. The sun boat as a double serpent. An extremely ancient idea, which occurs, for instance, as early as the famous ivory tablet of King Men's, is the blending of the human shape of the sun with his hawk forms, so that the solar bird sails in the cabin of the huge ship as though it had no wings. On its daily way, the ship of the sun has adventures and adversaries, which apparently symbolize clouds and eclipses, and its perils increase still further at night, when it passes the western mountain ridge, the limit of the earth, and enters hostile darkness. Figure 10. The sun god at nighttime. With wisdom and magic in his boat, he is drawn by the spirits of the underworld. During the night, or part of it, the sun god illumines the regions of the dead, who for a time awaken from their sleep when his rays shine upon them, and who are sometimes believed to tow the sun's ship through the dead or windless lower waters, or through especially difficult parts of them, or who assisted there against its enemies. At night the sun may also take rest in its special abode in the netherworld, in the island of flames, where the fiery element has its proper center. Figure 11. Atom behind the western gate of heaven. Its obvious explanation is identification with Knim, the guardian of the waters coming from the lower world and master of Hades. The sun at night time is lost in Knim's dark realm and unites with him. The description of the sun as a fragrant flame of incense seems to find its explanation in the fact that it rises in the eastern regions, whence spices and perfumes come. Figure 12. Thout as a baboon plus. Most closely associated with the sun we find his secretary Thout, the moon, who also heals his eye when it is wounded or torn out. When the gods or souls of their prehistoric capitals of divided Egypt, ÄITO, and Hierakonpolis, who were represented as human figures with the heads of hawks or jackals, and who are also called the souls of the East, are described as saluting the sun every morning. Some scholars have attempted to see in this allusions to the cries with which the animals of the wilderness, seem joyful to hail the rising sun. Figure 13. Baboons greet the sun over the celestial pillar, in celestial tree. However, the cynocephalous baboons who, according to the Egyptian view, likewise welcome the sun thus with prayers and hymns at his rising, also bid him farewell at his setting and even salute, accompany, and aid the nocturnal sun as he voyages through the netherworld. Therefore their role seems to have been developed from the part which Thout played as assistant to the sun god, and the hawks and jackals already mentioned likewise rather suggest mythological explanations. Fig 14. Baboons saluting the morning sun. He rises in the eastern mountains from the symbols of the Osirian state and of life. However, the cynocephalous baboons who, according to the Egyptian view, likewise welcome the sun thus with prayers and hymns at his rising, also bid him farewell at his setting and even salute, accompany, and aid the nocturnal sun as he voyages through the netherworld. Therefore their toll seems to have been developed from the part which Thout played as the assistant to the sun god, and the hawks and jackals already mentioned likewise rather suggest mythological explanations. Figure 15. Thout. It is remarkable that the moon, which was so important, especially in Babylonia, never rivaled the sun among the Egyptians. At a rather early time it was identified with the white ibis god Thout, earlier Zuti, Duti. The local divinity of Khmunu Hermopolis, who thus became the deity of reckoning and writing, and in his capacity as secretary of the company of gods acted as the judge of divinities and of men. Figure 16. Thout the scribe. The reason is clear: the moon is the easiest regulator of time for primitive man. In like manner, when Thout takes care of the injured eye of the solar or celestial god, and heals or replaces it, the underlying idea seems to be that the moon regulates such disturbances as eclipses. It may, however, equally well imply that the moon, being the second eye of the heavenly god, is simply a weaker reappearance of the sun at night. Figure 17. Thout in baboon form as moon god and scribe of the gods. Some scholars formerly sought the reason for the ibis form in the crescent-shaped bill of the bird, but such explanations fail when we find the cynocephalus regarded as another, somewhat later, embodiment of the same god of wisdom, so that this species of baboon appears not only as a special friend of the sun god but also as the deity of wisdom, the patron of scribes and scholars. Figure 18. Khans as moon god. During the period of the Middle Empire also Khans, the least important member of the Theban triad, assumed the character of a moon god because the union of Amenri as the sun with Mut as the sky led to the theory that the moon was their child. He is usually represented in human form, wearing a side lock to indicate youth. But later, like Horus, he sometimes has the head of a hawk and also appears very much like Da, although he is frequently equated with Thout. An ibis head for him is rare. Figure 19. A personified pillar of the sky. We have already noted the thought that the sky is water and that it forms a continuation of the Nile or of the ocean, on which the solar barge pursues its way. It is not clear how this was harmonized with the parallel, though the rarer idea that the sky was a metal roof, a belief which may have been derived from observation of meteorites. Sometimes only the center of heaven, the throne, Kansa's moon god of its master, is thought to be of metal, while other texts speak of the solar ship sailing over the metal as though this was under the celestial waters. This conception of a metal dome explains some expressions of later times, such as the name of iron, Benipet, sky metal, or the later word for thunder, Krubai, literally, sound of the metal, that is, thunder was evidently explained as the beating of the great sheets of metal which constituted the sky. Figure 20. The sun god on his stairs. The sky may also be explained as a great staircase, mostly double, which the sun was supposed to ascend and to descend daily. Figure 21. The dead witnesses the birth or the sun from the celestial tree. Another early concept describes the sky as a huge tree overshadowing each. The stars, the fruits or leaves which hang from its branches. When the gods perch on its boughs, they are evidently identified with the stars. The celestial tree disappears in the morning, and the sun god rises from its leaves. In the evening he hides himself again in the foliage and the tree. Or it is double of evening time, once more spreads over the world. So that 365 trees symbolize the year, or to typify its turning points, or night and day. Figure 22. The sun boat and the two celestial trees. This thought of the celestial or cosmic tree or trees, which is found among so many nations, also underlies the idea of the tree of life, whose fruit keeps the gods and the chosen souls of the dead in eternal youth and in wisdom in Egypt as elsewhere. The tree of fate, whose leaves or fruits symbolize events or the lives of men, represents the same thought. The past, as well as the future, is written in the stars. Osiris, as the god of heaven, is frequently identified with the heavenly tree or with some important part of it, or is brought into connection with its fruit or blossom. Figure 23. The dead at the tree and spring of life. As the world tree it is thus compared to the widest branching tree of Egypt, the sycamore. More rarely it is likened to the date palm or tamarisk. Sometimes it is the willow, which grows so near the water that it may easily be associated with the celestial tree springing from the abyss or the Osirian waters. In connection with the Osiris myth, however, the tree is mostly the Persei, or, perhaps later, the fragrant cedar growing on the remote mountains of Asia, or, again, the vine through whose fruit love and death entered into the world. While as the tree of fate it is once more usually the Persei of Osiris. Figure 24. Amun as the supreme divinity registers a royal name on the holy Persi in the palace of the sun. As we have already seen, the most famous of earthly proxies was the sacred Persi tree of Heliopolis, which we find e.g. in the accompanying picture, completely identified with the heavenly tree. But the central sanctuary of every nome had a holy tree which, probably, was always claimed to symbolize heaven. Even more botanical species were represented in these earthly counterparts than those which we have mentioned. Figure 25. Symbol of Hathor from the beginning of the historic age. When heaven is personified, it is a female being. Since the word pet, heaven, is feminine. Therefore the sky is compared to a woman bending over the earth, or to a cow whose legs correspond to the 4 pillars at the cardinal points. The goddess Hathor of Dendera, who was originally symbolized by the head or skull of a cow nailed over the door. Symbol of Hat temple, or on a pillar, was very early or from the beginning of the historic age identified with the cow-shaped goddess of heaven. And many other female divinities identified with the sky, especially Isis, indicated their celestial nature in the pictures by wearing the horn or even the head of a cow. Figure 26. Hathor at evening entering the western mountain and the green thicket. The popular symbol of Hathor became a strange mixture of a human and a bovine face, thus suggesting how long the human and the animal personification must have existed side by side. As a symbol of heaven, this celestial face may claim to have the sun and the moon as eyes, although the goddess more frequently represents only the principal eye of the celestial god, the sun. In cow form, the goddess is usually shown as wearing the sun between her horns and as appearing among flowers and plants, i.e., in a thicket analogous to the green leaves of the celestial tree, which send forth the sun in the morning and hide him in the evening. 27. The sun god between the horns of the celestial cow. The sun may also be thought to hide himself in the body of the heavenly cow during the night, so that he enters her mouth in the evening and is born again from her womb in the morning. Thus, by a conception through the mouth, the sun god begets himself every night and is called the bull of his mother, that is his own father, a name which is much used in hymns. As carrying the sun, Hathor may herself. Figure 28. The dead meets Hathor behind the celestial tree again be regarded as a solar divinity. As the mistress of heaven sitting amid green rays, Hathor can become seated in or can be identified with the celestial tree, from which she gives heavenly food and drink to the souls of the dead, as in figure 23. And thus she is shown as bestowing eternal life upon them. Her 4 blue-black dresses hang across the sky or form it, each dress marking a cardinal point. Sometimes these tresses are also attributed to Horus as a celestial god and the male counterpart of Hathor, on the 4 sons of Horus. Much mythological fancy seems to have been attached to this network. beautiful but dangerous, delicate yet strong, which surrounds the whole world. Figure 29. Meteret, the mistress of the sky and of both countries, that is Egypt. The idea of the sky as a cow is likewise combined with one which we have already noted, according to which the sky is the water of a river or a continuation of the ocean, so that the cow's body may be covered with lines representing water. And in this form the divinity is sometimes called Me'eteret, or the Great Flood. Since this name is more suggestive than Hathor, the sun is usually said to have been born on or by the Great Flood, Meteret, or to have climbed on her back or between her horns on the day of creation. But the same process may also take place every morning, for the daily and the cosmogonic processes are always parallel. Even when the sun's primeval or daily birth is described as being from a blue lotus flower in the celestial or terrestrial ocean, he can be called child of Meteret. Figure 30. The goddess of Diosporis Parva. As the goddess of the sky in cow form, Hathor assumed many of the functions of the Asiatic Queen of Heaven, so that later she became the special patroness of women and the deity of love, beauty, joy, music, and ornaments. While, again exactly like the Semitic Astarte, she was sometimes mistress of war. Her husband, as we have seen, is usually Horus, the male ruler of the sky. This goddess has been multiplied into the group of the seven Hathor who foretell the future, especially of every child at his birth. The suspicion that these seven fates were originally the Pleiades, which, among certain other nations, were the constellation of human fate, especially of ill-omened fate, and also the foretellers of the harvest, is confirmed when we find the seven Hathor cows with their bull. For the Pleiades are in the constellation of Taurus. Figure 31. Not receiving the dead. The representation of the sky in human, feminine form, which Hathor might also assume, led to the identification with many goddesses who were originally local, but who were often solarized in later times. Among these divinities being Isis, sometimes with her sister and rival, Nephthys, the Theban Mot, and the fiery Tephanet. For the nocturnal sky in particular, the prevalent personification is Nut, who, in conformity with her name, is generally understood to be a celestial counterpart of the abyss Nu, or Nun, i.e., as the heavenly waters which form a continuation of the ocean yet flows around and under the earth. Figure 32. Nut with symbols on the sky in day_time. For the nocturnal sky, in particular, the prevalent personification is Nut, who, in conformity with her name, is generally understood to be a celestial counterpart of the abyss Nu, or Nun, i.e., as the heavenly waters which form a continuation of the ocean that flows around and under the earth. We should expect her to be Nu's consort, but she is seldom associated with him in this capacity. She is, instead, the wife of the earth god. by whom she gives birth to the sun each morning, and in a similar fashion, as the one who bore, or bears, the gods, i.e., all the heavenly bodies. She is the mother of all life, or at least of the younger generation of gods who form the transition to mankind. Figure 33. Kebas, bearer of vegetation. Funerary pictures, especially on coffins, show her receiving the souls of the dead into her star-decked bosom, arms, and wings. As the counterpart of the dark abyss depth, she is also explained as the sky of the underworld, where the firmament hangs permanently upside down, or whence by night it ascends from the waters to change place with the bright sky of day. Therefore Nut, the mother of the stars, is united with the stellar tree of heaven, in which she is hidden, or whose branches are formed by her limbs. She is, however, not always clearly distinguished from the sky in the daytime. And, correspondingly, all goddesses identified with the vault of heaven may likewise take the place of the nocturnal sky, especially Hathor in her frequent function of the divinity of the West and of the dead. Figure 34. Keb with his hieroglyphic symbol. Nut's husband, by whom she bears the sun god, and the moon, is Keb, the god of the earth, who is often depicted as a man resting on his back or his side, and with plants springing from his body. The goose which sometimes adorns his head when he is pictured as standing erect is simply the hieroglyph which forms an abbreviation of his name. But the theologians soon misinterpreted this to mean that the earth god was a huge gander, the great Kaka, who laid the solar egg. Figure 35. Kebas, a serpent and Nut. He also has a serpent's head as being the master of snakes, his special creatures. Or on his human head rests the complicated crown of the Egyptian crown prince, as he is often called. In all probability Keb was originally only a local divinity, near Heliopolis, without cosmic function, for the earlier traditions know another god of the earth, who is called Akka or Akkeryu. Figure 36. Keb watching Akka and extended over him. To the left is seen the sun, as Capri, in the lower world. This deity is depicted as a double lion with two opposite heads, sometimes human, on one body, the one mouth swallowing the sun at evening when he enters the desert mountains in the west, while from the other he comes forth in the mornings, so that by night the sun god passes through Akka's body, the earth. Figure 37. Disfigured representation of Akka, assimilated to Shwand Tephanit. Later theologians sought to reconcile the existence of the superfluous Akka with that of his successor Keb by making the older god the representative of the lower regions of the earth and depicting him as black. Then Keb is placed over him as a guardian, so that some scholars could actually confuse Akka with the satanic dragon Apop, lying in the depths of the earth. Certain later artists and theologians also separated the composite figure of Akka into two lions turning their backs to each other and carrying the two mountains between which the sun rises.